Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Ready to explore another fascinating corner of the world today.
Always exciting to dive in. What have we got?
Today it's all about pollination. You know, that process that helps us get all those delicious fruits and veggies.
Ah, yes. Pollination. It's like nature's secret code for making new plants, a little magic between animals and plants.
Okay, so it's important. But to be honest, I'm a little fuzzy on how it all works.
Yeah.
What exactly is pollination? I mean, what's the technical definition?
Well, think of it like this. You've got a flower. It's a bit like a tiny house, and it wants to create a family of seeds.
Okay, makes sense.
But to make those seeds, the flower needs a special ingredient. We call it pollen.
Pollen, like the stuff that makes me sneeze in the spring.
Exactly. It's that fine, powdery substance.
Yeah.
And pollination, well, it's like a special delivery service.
Yeah.
It carries that pollen from one part of the flower to another, or sometimes even to a whole different flower.
So it's like a tiny messenger carrying a super important package.
Exactly.
But why can't flowers just deliver the pollen themselves? Why do they need a delivery service?
Great question. Most flowers can't actually move that pollen around on their own. They need a little help, and that's where the amazing pollinators come in.
The pollinators. So I'm guessing it's not just little mail trucks driving around between flowers.
Definitely not. The world of pollinators, it's incredibly diverse. You've got your busy bees, your fluttering butterflies, colorful birds.
Wait, birds too?
Oh, yeah. And even the wind gets in on the action sometimes. Each of these pollinators has its own special way of collecting and spreading pollen.
Wow. It sounds like pollination's a real team effort. So tell me more about these pollinators. Let's start with the bees. They always seem so busy.
They are. Bees are like the superstars of the pollination world. Their bodies are covered in tiny hairs that attract pollen like a magnet.
Huh.
Yeah.
I've noticed that.
As they buzz from flower to flower, they're collecting nectar. That's their food. And in the process, well, they pick up pollen and spread it around. Some bees, like honeybees, they even live in huge colonies. Working together, they pollinate tons of flowers.
Wow. Organized, A&D, hardworking. What about butterflies? I always see those fluttering around my garden.
Butterflies are definitely graceful, and they've got these long, thin tongues, perfect for reaching deep inside flowers to get that sweet nectar. As they move from flower to flower, their wings brush against the pollen, carrying it along with them.
So they're basically flying pollen dusters.
Pretty much.
Now, you mentioned birds. How do they help with pollination?
You know hummingbirds?
Yeah, they're so tiny and fast.
Exactly. Hummingbirds have these long, thin beaks, perfect for reaching into flowers, and their heads and feathers. Well, they pick up pollen as they feed, transferring it to other flowers as they move around.
So we've got bees, butterflies, and birds. But you also mentioned the wind. How can something we can't even see be a pollinator?
Well, some plants, think grasses and lots of trees, they depend on the wind to carry their pollen. They produce very lightweight pollen. It travels easily on the breeze.
Like a natural airmail system.
You got it.
With so many different pollinators out there, I bet flowers have developed some pretty clever ways to attract them.
Absolutely. Flowers have come up with all sorts of strategies to catch a pollinator's attention. Think about it. Why do you think flowers are so colorful?
Well, they're pretty to look at.
Exactly. Those bright colors. They act like a big sign to pollinators saying, hey, over here, we got something tasty for you.
And what about those amazing smells? Sometimes my whole garden is just filled with fragrance.
That's another trick. Flowers release those scents to guide pollinators towards the nectar inside, and they're especially fragrant when their favorite pollinators are most active.
Smart. Okay, so we've got the flowers attracting the pollinators, but I'm still a bit fuzzy on the actual pollen transfer. How does that work?
Okay, picture a bee landing on a bright yellow sunflower. As it reaches deep inside for that nectar, its fuzzy body bumps against the part of the flower that makes pollen. We call that the anther. And guess what?
Okay.
The pollen sticks to the bee, almost like static cling on your clothes.
So the bee is like a pollen taxi.
Right. And when that bee visits another flower, some of that pollen rubs off onto the stigma. That's the part of the flower that receives the pollen.
And that's what lets the flower make seeds.
Precisely. It's a pretty intricate process, isn't it?
It is. It makes you realize just how complex nature really is. But things don't always go smoothly in nature, do they? Are there threats to these pollinators we've been talking about?
Sadly, yes. Pollinators face a lot of challenges these days. Things like habitat loss, when their homes are destroyed, and pesticide use, those chemicals that can harm them, and of course, climate change is a big one. All of these things disrupt the balance of nature.
It's a good reminder that we need to protect these creatures. What can we do to help?
Plenty. Planting gardens with lots of different flowers that attract pollinators, And cutting down on pesticide use. Oh, and supporting farmers who practice sustainable agriculture, that's a big one too.
It sounds like even small actions can make a difference. This deep dive has been amazing. I've learned so much about pollinators.
They're pretty incredible, aren't they? Next time you see a bee buzzing around, take a moment to appreciate the whole pollination process. It's happening right before your eyes.
I will. And I'll remember that without these little creatures, our world wouldn't be nearly as colorful or delicious. So let's all do our part to protect them. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Until next time.